I'm on the board of directors, and I am chairing this particular committee that's doing the search for our executive director of schools. And I'm pleased to present to you our third finalist, Mr. Karl Reichmann. I will not tell you anything about him because he will tell me to shut up too, probably, because he's going to cover it all himself. I'll let him take it away.
So now there are patches of you here and there and all over. I want to thank you. It's with great respect that I really appreciate being here and the work that your committees have done, your selection committee, your board, and everybody. And so I'm really grateful. I had a great flight in, and it's been wonderful. So hopefully the rest of the evening will be as wonderful for you. So I put a presentation together. It's a little bit long, but it hopefully will answer a lot of your questions. And I know that you have questions that you've already submitted, and you may have more questions when you see my presentation. And it's all about learning, doing, and being. And I'm going to be going over a number of different things. I will leave a copy of the presentation with Greg and with Steve, because Steve wants to put it up on the web. So I'll give both of them a copy of it so you can look at it either on the web or you can ask to see it if you have other questions. And I'll always be available for you to contact me either by email or by phone to ask any additional questions that may come up if you so choose to do that, or if you're interested in doing that at all. So a quote from Nelson Mandela. Education is, can we turn the lights off a little bit so they can see this? Can you all see this clearly, or would it be better if we, is it okay?
I think it's okay.
Okay, never mind, thank you. Education is the most powerful weapon which we can use to change the world. From a man who spent over 27 years in prison. And he was very accurate about that, and I know all of you believe that, or you wouldn't be here tonight. These are the things I'm going to cover with you tonight. I'm going to go over what my background is, a personal vision, which I will interdisperse at different times throughout the presentation, where do we start, some of the ideas that I have about where we need to address things that most schools have to address in general. What is a community of learners? What's a community of risk takers? Where do we go beyond the basics? And closing with, again, leadership and my personal vision. And so, at any point in time, if you do have a question, all I'd ask is, so that I can get through the whole presentation, just jot it down. And again, as you did with Greg and the board, submitting questions, I'll answer them at the end. I have a very eclectic background. I was actually born in Germany after World War II. I was a displaced person. And we moved from Germany and we were brought to the United States. And I was raised in the South Bronx, which is poor, urban, very poor, very at risk, very gang-oriented. And so I know what it is to be brought up in a very difficult and challenging environment. I lived in Manhattan and in New York. And then in 1985, I moved out to California and worked in California, both in education and out of education. I've been in private, I've been in public, I've been in technical schools. I've even worked for the government in education in the Job Corps, which we'll talk about in a minute. And then from Southern California, meaning Los Angeles and Long Beach, I went to Northern California, to an area called Lake County. Lake County is at 3,000 feet. And it's a very poor rural community. So I've had the experience of working both with rich districts, with poor urban districts, as well as poor rural districts, and seeing the differences and the challenges that affect kids across all those boundaries and all those areas. Then I semi-retired, and my wife, who was with HBO for 23 years, Time Warner, was offered a job in New Orleans to be the executive director for the Baton Rouge Film and TV Commission. And so she took me and our two kids and dragged me to Louisiana. And I got bored. I didn't like it. Not Louisiana, so to speak, but just not doing something, not being in the game. So I started consulting. And as you can appreciate today, consulting has its ups and downs, and decided that I wanted to get back into the game full time. These are my degrees. I have a professional diploma in administration and supervision. I have a master's in elementary education. I have a bachelor's in history, because at one point I thought I'd be a lawyer. And I have 2 PhDs, but they're distance learning. And one is in comparative religion, and the other is in humanistic education. So I cover all the boundaries. I know what it takes to get those degrees. I know what the challenges are, and I know what it takes even to get into those schools to figure out how to get those degrees. Here are my certifications. In California, I have a clear certification as an administrator, as well as a clear certification as a classroom teacher. In New York, I am permanently certified as a school district administrator, and again, those certifications mean superintendent as well as principal. I have a nursery, kindergarten through 6th grade certification, as well as a 7th through 12th grade certification in New York, and all of those are permanent certifications. In California, my certifications come up in 2013, and I just have to reapply again. Then I went to the Bureau of Private Post-Secondary because I started doing some work for technical schools, getting them out of trouble most of the time. Schools that had issues, whether it was academic issues, graduation issues, placement issues, any number of issues, and they would call me in and I would take the school over, I would turn the school around, and then I would go back and turn it back over to their owners. And to do so, I ended up getting certification as a director, as well as interactive multimedia, as well as financial aid. So I'm very conversant in financial aid, both all the title funds as well as financial aid for students trying to get to higher education and get all those monies that are potentially available to them. Then when I moved to Louisiana, even though I didn't take a position in Louisiana, I'm certified in Louisiana as both a superintendent as well as a principal. So that means that when you look at these certifications, in most of the other states across the country, I have reciprocity. I still have to apply, and in some cases they want me to take a course or two, but I don't have to start from scratch and get certification all over again. My experience. Most recently, as I said, I've been consulting. I've been consulting in 2 specific areas. One has been with charters, helping people to write charters, as well as helping people to do the self-studies and everything that's necessary to get their charters renewed. And then the other area that I've been working a great deal in is in professional development, in the areas of positive discipline, restorative justice, peer mediation, and also project-based learning. Now, I call project-based learning somewhat different. I call it inquiry, project/experiential-based learning. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go on, so that you'll understand what I mean by that. Some of the most recent positions I've held is I was the superintendent for Lake County International Charter School District. We were a K through 8 school district, and I took the school district and I got them their WASC accreditation, their IB, International Baccalaureate authorization, as well as took them through their first successful school charter renewal. On top of that, we were able to purchase a building, and I helped to raise the funds to purchase a building and renovate a building, and all of that was done within 3 years. So I know what it is to be in a crunch, and what it takes to do self-studies, and what they're looking for, and what accreditation agencies are looking for, and I did all that just within that last school from 2006 to 2010. Prior to that, I was with the Job Corps, where I went in and they had a need to, the Job Corps works this way. They have 300 kids, and they live there for 2 to 3 years, and those kids are able to, most of them have dropped out in 8th grade or 9th grade. They didn't get a GED, they didn't get a high school diploma. And so what the Job Corps does is it works with them to get them graduated, whether it's a GED or a high school diploma, possibly even go to college. But I was responsible for all the technical trades. So to work with them on the high school level and then get them to move into technical trades. Get them into everything from cooking, to gardening, to automotive, to maintenance, masonry, glazing, and then make sure they had jobs when they got out, and make sure that the school monitored those jobs for a year after they graduated. And so it was a whole program that I put together for the Job Corps. Now, Job Corps is funded by the government, but it's actually run by independent contractors. Next was 2 different colleges, Travel and Trade and California Paramedical. And these were 2 colleges where they were in trouble. One was in trouble with the accrediting agency. That was California Paramedical. The owner told the accrediting agency that she was responsible for all the academics. Yet she didn't have a degree, nor did she have any coursework, nor did she have any knowledge of how to do curriculum development. And they didn't like that, and they wanted to pull her ticket. And in Travel and Trade, the industry was shifting. As you know, today, there are hardly any travel agents out there anymore. And what Travel and Trade was doing was basically producing travel agents both for all different kinds of ventures, whether it was to go on a cruise ship or it was to go on a safari. Well, now with the internet, the industry was shifting completely. So I went ahead and reworked the entire curriculum and what the outcomes were going to be, turned the school into a school that was going to produce entrepreneurs, excuse me, and so that when kids graduated the school, they could go out and open up their own businesses and determine what they were going to do and how they were going to focus in the travel. And I added hospitality, because hospitality has become a bigger and bigger area today in the world. Then Westside Waldorf. Westside Waldorf is a Rudolf Steiner school. I don't know if you're familiar with Rudolf Steiner at all. It's an alternative education that was started in the 1930s after World War I. And I went in and helped them with their development and their administration. The school doesn't have a board per se as you do. It's a teacher-run school. Now, I bite my tongue in saying this, but like in many cases, that's like the inmates running the asylum. And so I had to reorganize the school, help it to turn around. And lastly, I was a 4th grade teacher for the Center for Early Education. Now, these are just a couple of samples. I also have a much deeper, eclectic background. In computers, I worked for business technology in the 70s when IBM first came out with their 5110s, 5120s, and 5130s, and Series 1s, where I was a systems analyst and a trainer. I would go in, figure out what the company wanted. There was no off-the-shelf software back then. Everything was customized. And then work with the programmers to make sure the programs got customized for the client, and then go and train the client how to use the systems. Then from there, I worked on Wall Street. And my work on Wall Street was for a number of reasons. One was to learn how to fundraise, because we're better to, who was the thief who said, we're better to get, where the money is in the banks. Well, the money's in Wall Street. And so I worked for British American Petroleum and British American Commodity Options. Now, in British American Commodity Options, you may or may not remember that in the late 70s, coffee went sky high. And we took $3,000 and turned it in 3 months into 18 million. Think about that. Just buying and selling coffee futures. Then we took that money and we did step-out wells. And we did the first step-out wells in Brattleboro, Vermont. We had a $900,000 program. Each well was approximately $100,000. The first well hit with $7 million worth of reserves in the ground. And so I have a background that includes, as you're hopefully starting to see, that includes fundraising, finance, understanding how to bootstrap a business, and I bring all of that to my educational acumen. And we also took companies public on NASDAQ, and that was a lot of fun. I traveled around the world, to Siberia, to Russia, to Europe, North Africa, whereby we would take a company in those countries and convert them to an American company so that they could go public on NASDAQ. And we did it all using the internet. Now, prior to this, when I first started my career, before I ever even thought about becoming a teacher, I was a professional dancer. I was trained in ballet. I danced modern and jazz. I was in the Court of Ballet of the Metropolitan Opera, and from that I went into choreography, and eventually into directing, and eventually from that into producing. And it was my introduction as a dancer and a choreographer that turned me on to education and learning and got me excited about it, because I hated being on unemployment, and so I would substitute teach. And I would be in the classroom, and I had a great time in the classroom, and I would make good money. And when I finally got hurt dancing, because most dancers' life expectancies are not that great, if any of you have taken dance, you know what I'm talking about. And so I went full-time into education. Also, when I moved to California in 1985, I was introduced to Marvel Productions and was offered a position directing Saturday morning animation. And so I have a business acumen, an educational acumen, as well as an artistic acumen. And then on the other side, I had a company called Television Design Group, 3 other friends. We did the first music video in 1983 that was computer animated. First one ever in history. And it was called Freakazoid for Elektra Records. And it won all kinds of awards. We then created the ABC After School Specials logo. And from that, I created Curious Kids. And these are my cartoon characters. And you don't see them as much today, but a number of years ago, if you went into Burger King and you knew anything about the Kids Club, those are my kids. And I gave birth to them. And that's how I met my wife also. When I work with teachers, one of the first things I say, especially when I'm doing professional development, is I say, don't believe anything I say, experiment with it for yourself to determine what's true for you. Many of us have a background where somebody tells us something and we take for granted that it should be accurate and we should believe it. I tell people, don't believe what I'm telling you, prove it for yourself. Put it into practice, experience it, experiment with it, see if it's true for you. Just because I tell you something, don't necessarily believe it. Now, my personal vision. Right now, and for years in the past, there's been a hue and cry that schools are broken. I don't think there's anybody in this room right now who would contradict that that's a statement that you have heard over and over and over again. I disagree with that statement. Schools aren't broken. They're stuck. They're stuck in an antiquated system. They're stuck going back to the late 1800s and the early 1900s. They are stuck moving from an agricultural to an industrial environment. And yet today we're moving into an information environment. And we haven't caught up with ourselves. Now technology has exceeded us. And yet in most schools you don't see things like social media and other things being used to help kids learn, to give them an experience of what's going on in the world and connect them with people around the world that they can learn from. So schools aren't stuck, broken, they're stuck. And of course, politically, schools and education, and because it is the only area in most school state budgets where they can take the money away from us. And that's been the bouncing ball that has hurt education the most, in my opinion, over and over and over again. That they will cut the budgets, and where do they take the money from? If they can, education. Other places they can't take it. So, every 10 years or so, education tries to reinvent itself. Over the last 20 years, the first thing that came out was magnet schools. And they did really well within the confines of a district. And then, in the Midwest, the charter school movement was developed. And charter school movement took off. And Texas is a great example of a charter school movement taking over. California is a good example. Louisiana now is starting to move in that direction. There's a lot of things that are happening in the charter school movement that are very exciting. But like anything else, it all comes down to the people who are running the schools. And what charter schools give you, it gives the parents more say in your education and the education of their kids. Now, what does education look like? In my opinion, I think we would all agree that if you asked for a picture of education, most people would say, well, that's what it looks like. Kids sitting in class, raising their hands, and being called upon. And if you think about it from the teacher's perspective, that's what it looks like. A nice, docile class with kids looking to answer questions that the teachers put on the table to address. I'd like to propose that there are other ways that this could look, such as this way, or this way, or this way, this way, this way, this way. And it all comes down to one word and one question. How do we reignite our kids' curiosity? Because I can tell you, having traveled across the country, as well as having traveled to other countries, the hue and cry has always been, how come schools cut out our kids' imaginations? How come it destroys our kids' curiosity? Well, it doesn't. It just shuts it down. Because the expectations are different than how we learn. So what I'd like you to do is take a moment and think about yourself when you were a child, from say about the age of 1 to 5, or if you have children or grandchildren, think about them from within the same time period, between 1 to 5, and think about how we learned when we were back then. And this doesn't, you are a classic academy. This doesn't change what you do or how you do it. It's about looking at how we learn and supplementing and supporting it. How did we learn? Think about it. Were you taught how to draw? Or did you just pick up pencils and draw all over the place? Think about how many walls you drew on, how many floors you drew on. Think about how many times you got yelled at because you were drawing on things that your parents didn't want you to draw on, but you were tenacious and you were going to continue to draw on. But nobody taught you how to draw. Nobody sat you down when you were 3 years old or 2 years old and said, this is how you draw. You just did it. And many times you did it by modeling what other kids did or just picking up something and experimenting with it. Were you taught how to play? Nobody taught you how to play. Think about it. When you were a kid, think about your own kids. They started playing. They started playing with other kids. I remember when my son was a couple of months old and we were in the supermarket and he was in the basket and we walked next to another basket with another kid about the same age. Hit it off. All of a sudden, everything was gangbusters. They were playing with each other. They're still friends today. I didn't have to teach them how to meet with each other and how to greet with each other. They figured it out all on their own. Think about this. I will propose that your kids, including yourself when you were young, knew more about dinosaurs than your parents did. You knew more about it. Yet you didn't even know how to read. So how do you know all this? Well, remember, as human beings in our species, we learn because of telling stories. And we take those stories and we repeat them over and over and over again. Think about this. Who knows stories better than your children? Your children and you knew the stories better than your parents did, and you could tell them the stories. You could tell them what was going to come on the next page, but you couldn't read. But you could tell them what was going to happen. You could tell them what was going on. That's what it's all about. It's all about how do we learn, and what's the best methodologies for us to learn within. Inquiry, as I said earlier, inquiry, project-based learning, it's in our DNA. We're curious about everything. I propose that our children today know more about computers than we did at their age. My son is 15 years old now. He is highly gifted, but he is autistic. He's also Asperger's. He's also ADHD. He's got it all in a package. But if you look at him, he'll look you in the eyes, he'll talk to you, he'll answer your questions, and you'll think there's nothing wrong with him until you spend time with him. But guess what? When he wanted to play on the computer and I would get him computer games, he would never read the directions. And literally within an hour, he knew how to play the game, and within 2 hours, in most cases, he beat the game. And he's not a savant. So what's going on here? And what are we not doing that's right, or what are we doing that's right? And how do we evaluate these things? We learn more by doing. We learn more from each other. We learn from other cultures, and we get different perspectives by connecting with other cultures. We learn more on the job. I suspect that every one of you, no matter how many years of education you had, no matter whether you graduated high school or graduated a community college or went to a technical school or went to a four-year college or a graduate degree, I will propose to you right now that you learned more the first year on the job than you did in college. And you learned it from your coworkers. You learned it from the people you were working with. That's what education is all about. How do we learn it? Where did we get it from? How did we absorb it? How did we channel it? So here's a question. Sometimes we need to think outside the box. I'd like you to think about this question. From what perspective does an architect design and build a building? Anybody want to take a shot at it? You all know what architects do. How do they, when they're designing a building, from what perspective do they actually build the building? Nobody wants to take a shot? Oh, come on, be daring.
The purpose of the building.
The purpose, okay. What's the purpose of the building? That's good.
Inside out.
Inside out, yes. We got to be able to get in, we got to be able to get out. We need egress and everything, yes. Anything else? How they're going to use it, again. I'll tell you what most kids will tell you right from the beginning, right off the bat. You know what most kids will tell you? From the basement. We build it up. The reality is that's not correct. Architects build a building from the roof down. So if you have a 10-story building, you, as an architect, have to know the weight of the roof and all the people that are going to be on it so that you'll know what the 9th floor needs to be able to do to hold up the 10th floor. And then you need to know what the 8th floor needs to do to hold up the 9th and 10th floor, all the way down, because when you get to the ground floor, unless you know what's on top of you and all the things you just mentioned, unless you know what that weight is, you don't know how deep to go for your basement. You don't know how far down to dig. And so sometimes we need to think differently. So if you agree with anything that I've just proposed, then why are we still doing it this way? Why do we feel that we need to teach kids things? Now, there's not to say that we don't need to teach certain things, and there are skill sets that kids need to learn, and we need to introduce it to them. But is that how we need to teach everything? And that's the question. Everyone seems to have a similar response to the following. Do schools make a difference? And what are the characteristics that will make a school better? Well, you have 2 campuses. And you know that one campus is strong and has been working for a long time, and now you want that other campus to model that. Well, we need to evaluate it. We need to look at it. We need to determine, how do we do that? How do we merge them together? How do we get them to function cohesively together? What do we do to take one bit of information, the culture and the curriculum, everything, how do we bring it over to the other campus? How do we do all that and yet not drop the culture? Make the culture stronger for both campuses. My work has been to clarify and articulate what a great school is over and over again. Most schools have wonderful visions and great mission statements, but there are other things that they need. And in my opinion, what they need is a value statement and a strategic 3 to 5 year plan that includes all of those elements, all the way down to reflection. And what's key is, how do you implement, and how do you execute, and how do you assess your success? So in many cases, you must think backwards. Now, to do this, requires a collaborative support of all the stakeholders, of all of you here, of all the parents, of all the kids in this community, in your community, of the business community, of the faith-based community. You need to go out, we need to go out, and make sure that we're hearing from everybody to understand what their perspective is and what they want. And once we understand that, then we can agree on budget scenarios, then we can agree on P&Ls, then we can agree on projections, then we can do cash flow analysis. And if you don't have the ability to do that, you have no way of measuring and being accountable to you, the stakeholders. And that's the job of the board and your executive director and your administration, including your teachers, is to be accountable to you as parents. Then if you take this even further, academic data is crucial. And I can't tell you how many times I have been in schools across the country where they use assessment tools and the teachers do not know how to use them. They don't know how to interpret them. They don't know how to marry them together with the formative and summative assessments that they are already using. So part of what you have to do is professional development. You've got to teach teachers what the data is all about, what the data is doing, what it's telling you, and how you're going to incorporate the data from a standardized test all the way through to the summative and formative assessments that the school that you guys are giving as teachers who are sitting here today are giving the students. How do you marry all that together? How do you analyze that? How do you then feed it back to parents and to the board and to the community in a way that they're going to understand? And if teachers don't understand it, then you're not going to understand it. And it's crucial. Data is crucial to the lifeblood of a school. Oh, going back on this one. I'd like to talk for a moment about strategic schooling. It's a technique that I was introduced to and helped develop. It's going to be here. What do we mean by learning? It's basically two things. We want kids to be articulate. We want them to be creative. We want them to be problem solvers. We want them to be critical thinkers on the one hand. On the other hand, all our schools have to do one thing. We have to be accountable to the standardized tests. And if you're not accountable to the standardized tests, and your students don't do well on those tests, and the school doesn't do well on those tests, you can lose your funding, you can lose your charter. There's any number of ramifications that can take place. Now, for most of you, and even for your kids, that's where I developed, with help, strategic schooling. Which is, if you think about it, the people who write these standardized tests, they do not test for all the standards in any core area. They don't do it. So when you evaluate the tests, what you find is that you'll have a standard that'll have one question on the test. You'll have a standard that has 2 questions on the test. You'll have a standard that has 3 questions on the test. Well, I will guarantee you, as I stand here today, that next year, those standards that have 2 or 3 questions on the test will be on the test next year. Not necessarily the standard with 1 question on the test. And I've proven it over and over again with different schools. And I've had the teacher evaluate the test from the prior year. I've had them teach those standards to their students that appeared on the test 2 and 3 times. At the charter school that I just left, when I started, they have what's called the STAR test. We were at 703. From 703, we went to 715. From 715, we went to 739. And from 739, we went to 839. 100-point growth in 1 year. Why? Because we analyzed the test, we reviewed the test, and we taught those kids those standards that we felt were going to be on the test the next year. And on a standardized test, a student only has to get 1 or 2 more questions correct to go from below basic to above basic, to go from proficient to above proficient. You don't have to get 100 questions right. So if we develop strategies together that we can use, then our students benefit, and then we can do the job that you really want to do, is create kids who are critical thinkers and who are inquirers. Leadership. If we're going to ask our kids to grow, then we must help our teachers grow. We must offer them the support that they're going to need to grow as well. And what this means is accountability, it means expectations, it means benchmarks, it means timelines, it means them knowing clearly what our expectations are of them and how we're going to evaluate them. Culture, and I've talked to a number of you just before we started. Culture of the school is crucial, but it takes a while to build a culture, and it takes a while to grow a culture, and it takes a lot of tenacity to keep a culture growing because it's organic. But without a positive culture, your school dies and your school success goes down the tubes. The culture of your school is crucial. And not only is it crucial, but you have to keep it going. And you have to make sure that you're constantly feeding it and you're constantly growing it. But where does the culture come from ultimately? The culture comes from our students. It doesn't come from you as parents. It doesn't come from me as an administrator or from the teachers. It comes from the students. It's their school first and foremost. And they know what they want their school to be. You need to give them help. You need to set standards for them. You need to show them what the bar is. You need to tell them and excite them about what the possibilities are. But they're the ones who are going to help establish the culture of the school, not you or I. We just help facilitate. So I ask you to consider what might be, what could be, and perhaps what should be. I believe in great schools. I've seen many great schools, and I've helped a number of schools become good schools and even great schools. As I said, Lake County Charter School, we grew 100 points in 1 year. Unheard of. Our sponsoring district wanted to deny it, didn't want to accept it. They didn't even want to let us know when the grades came out that we beat them. But we did. What we're talking about is a community of learners. And how do we create that community of learners? A community of learners is a place where everybody's teaching each other, where everybody's learning from each other, and it's a place where everybody contributes to each other's growth. And this all comes down to making sure our kids are enjoying and celebrating everything they're learning. Celebrating it. Being thankful for it. Being excited by it. Being challenged by it. Turning around and challenging you as parents and teachers. When my kids first came home and started to challenge me, at first I was resistant. And then I thought, this is great. I have to think on my feet now because my kid's going to be asking me questions and I'd better be able to figure it out or help them figure it out. And we have to achieve this, and we can't do it alone. We have to do it together. So what do we have here? We need to talk to each other. We need to observe each other. We need to help each other. And I'm talking about our faculty, our administration, our staff. Everybody's involved in this. It's not them or us. It's everybody, including you as parents, including the board, including the community, including the businessmen in the community, including the political people in the community. So what we want are leaders. We're asking people that our kids be leaders, but if we're going to ask them to be leaders, we have to agree that they need to be able to take risks. And if they are to take risks, it has to be safe for them. And if it's going to be safe for our kids, it also has to be safe for our teachers. Our teachers have to trust the administration and the board that they can take risks and that we'll back them up and we'll support them. And if we fall down and stumble, we'll get up again and we'll figure out what went wrong and we'll reflect on what happened and we'll try something else. And I, for one, am willing to provide that safety net for any teacher who is willing to take a risk, because it's crucial. If my teachers aren't willing to take a risk, if they're not willing to step out on that board and jump off, how can they expect the kids to do it? You can't. And to do this, we must do it differently. And we want to create a school, as you have already, where there's energy, enthusiasm, and empathy. And where there is a climate of risk-taking. And where diversity is there, where we learn from diversity, and we cherish diversity, and we allow kids to understand what diversity is all about, and learn from them around the world. And we have the tools today to do it. When we talk about experiential learning, we're talking about the ability for our kids to get on the web, to watch TV, to go on TED.com and learn from people all around the world, or have an astronaut come into our science classroom via Skype and talk to the kids about what they're doing. Or an astronaut up in space today. Well, there was a show on just the other day, it was a Grammys or something. And who introduced the Grammys? But an astronaut up in space to the entire world. Why aren't we introducing them to our kids in school? Why aren't we bringing them in? Why aren't we letting them talk to our kids? Why aren't we letting our kids ask questions? We did a thing where, you may have heard of this, in Tibet, there was a school, the kids didn't even know what a kite was. Never had heard of a kite. The kids in the school here built kites, made kites, took them apart, and sent them to Tibet. And gave them the directions on how to put them together. And then the kids from Tibet got on Skype and were so excited to show the kids here in California what they had done in Tibet, and they were now flying kites. Why aren't we doing it together? Why aren't we using the assets that we have? Why aren't we using the technology that we have? And I also believe in a school where we forgive. There are very few things, I believe, that require discipline in the form of a suspension or an expulsion. Very few things. Everything else requires helping kids understand what happened, what went wrong, and helping them to problem solve differently. If all we do is a knee-jerk reaction, which a lot of schools do, is to suspend kids at the drop of a hat, what did they learn? My son is impulsive. I'll use him as another example. He's an impulsive kid. He got off the bus, and one of the other kids that he knew dropped something. It was a canister. He didn't know what was in the canister. He wanted to give the canister back to the kid, but the kid had got away from him. So he put the canister in his pocket, knowing that he was going to see the kid at the end of first period. Well, the teacher saw that he had something in his pocket, asked him to take it out of his pocket. He took it out of his pocket. It turned out to be a canister of tobacco. My kid doesn't use chewing tobacco. He never has. He was suspended for 3 days. What did he learn? He was trying to do something good and trying to be supportive of somebody. He didn't know what he had. And yet, what he was taught was that he was no good. He was being punished. Versus learning that you better make a better decision, and maybe you shouldn't have picked that up. Maybe you could have done something different. They didn't want to talk to him about it. They just suspended him for 3 days. I don't believe that that's what we want to be doing for our kids. Beyond basic. These are the things that I think are critical and crucial to what we want our kids to be doing. Critical thinking, creative and innovative, being collaborative, communicating, cross-cultural understanding, computer technology, being proficient, career learning, and self-reliance. What are our 21st century skills? Remember, when most of you were in school and you got out of school, the world didn't change that quickly. Today, the world is changing so quickly that by the time your children in elementary school get out of school, you will not recognize the world. You will not recognize technology. You will not recognize it. Who ever thought of social media? Who ever thought of the internet? The internet's relatively young. Who ever thought of emails? Think of all the things that have happened just since the 60s to today versus the early 1900s to today. It's amazing. So I see a school where kids can do all of these different things. Where they can think for themselves, they can take initiative, they have strong communication skills, they can work in teams, they have good organizational skills, analytical skills, they can use the technology, they're self-motivated, they have a strong work ethic, and they can problem solve. One of the beauties of project-based and experiential learning is that it includes everybody. So kids at the high end of the spectrum, the gifted and the talented, as well as kids at the low end of the spectrum, the at-risk or the special needs kids, all have something to offer each other. And when they work in teams and they work collaboratively, it comes out. And what we have to be willing to do is step back and let them demonstrate to us what they know and how they want to demonstrate it to us. And then it's about making partnerships. As I've said a number of times over and over again, it's about making the partnerships in the community. It's about going out into the community and getting the community to know who we are and what we stand for and what we're looking to do and how successful we are and why we're successful. And get them to come visit our school. Get them to come into the classrooms. Get them to talk to the kids. Get the kids to ask them questions. When I walk into a school, if kids aren't coming up to me and asking me who I am and why I'm here and you want to see what I've done, then I don't think I've gone into a school that I want to work at. I want kids to be enthusiastic and excited about what they're doing. So what do I bring to the table? I think I bring a number of things to the table. I think I bring vision to the table, that I'm a critical thinker, I'm a forward thinker. I think I have a tremendous amount of integrity, ethics, a moral backbone, and I have a passion for what I do. I think that I believe in data, and I'm data-driven, and I'm performance-driven as a culture. And I think that's crucial, that we be performance-driven as a culture. I believe that we need to be reviewing our programs on an ongoing basis, that we need to be evaluating them and trim-tabbing them. Everybody here understand trim-tabbing? Okay. An ocean liner has a rudder, okay? If you try to turn the rudder on an ocean liner, it will rip off because there's too much pressure in the ocean to turn the rudder. So if you look at the base of the rudder, there's a little tab. And that tab may be only this big and this wide. So when you turn the wheel in the wheelhouse, you're not turning the rudder, you're turning the trim tab. You turn the trim tab, the water hits the trim tab, it pushes the rudder. So we need to be trim tabbing in everything we do. We need to look at the subtle things we can do that make big changes. I think we also need to build consensus. We need to develop a shared vision. And we need to be working together on so many different ways and on so many different levels. And when it comes to financial management, I'm very good organizationally. I understand finances. I understand budgeting. I understand projections, P&Ls. I understand what they mean, how to use them, how to evaluate them, how to interpret them, how to determine where they're taking us, or how to review them to see where we have problems and we need to catch ourselves. As well as, in many budgets, you can take money from one area and move it into another area. But you've got to be judicious about it and make sure you're doing it appropriately. I also know federal funding, and I'm very versed in title and fundraising. And I am extremely committed to education. I've said this over and over again about giving teachers permission. Many times teachers are afraid of doing things because they don't think that if it doesn't work, what will happen? Will I be evaluated? Will I lose my job? No. If you're out there taking a risk and we've all agreed what that risk is and what you're trying to do and what you're trying to accomplish, and for some reason it didn't work out exactly the way we anticipated, let's evaluate it. Let's work at it together. Let's put it on the table with all the teachers and say, what could we do differently? How could we improve on this? Or maybe we need to abandon it. As I said, I've worked in urban and renewal schools. I believe in positive discipline. I believe kids need the ability to be able to discipline themselves, to be able to know what they're doing and work with each other to determine what's right and what's wrong, and that's what restorative justice is all about. So first, I see a great school as one in which I'd like to teach in and be a principal in. Second is a school that I want my children to go to. And from all of my research, ACA is definitely a school I'd want my kids to go to. And third is a school where children learn to become more responsive and creative and tolerant. So I want to leave you with 4 thoughts before you questions that you're going to hit me with. A teacher is one who makes himself progressively unnecessary. That doesn't mean get rid of teachers. That means that teachers become facilitators. Picasso said, all children are born artists. The problem is to retain an artist as we grow up. We need to celebrate the gift of our imagination, of our kids' imaginations, and we need to celebrate it and use that gift wisely. And education, my friends, is a hands-on experience. Thank you. So who starts with the group?
I'll read the questions. I thought you were going to go with a red-handed kind of tie in there. I caught somebody red-handed. All right. For the first kind of general question, kind of broader picture. What about ACA's mission and vision most appeals to you?
I think the classical education and how it's being implemented and the excitement the kids seem to feel about it and the strength that it has brought the parents and their enthusiasm for it is what really appeals to me, is that the parents and the community seem to be 100% behind it and we're supporting it, and that's crucial.
I think our most frequently asked question, how would you reconcile the requirement to accept students of all ability levels with the desire to keep academic standards high and in an effort to maintain high school ratings?
Well, as I said, we have the 2 different areas of education. We have the standardized tests and we have learning. Now, as far as the standardized test is concerned, I think I've already explained my opinion and ideas about that, and it's something that you can even try whether I'm here or not. But on the other side, I believe in inquiry and project-based learning and experiential learning. I believe with kids teaching each other. I believe that we learned when we were young from ourselves and from other people, and when we went out into the field, into the jobs, we learned from other people. We didn't learn from books, not that they're not necessary and that we need those skill sets, but when you put kids together, you don't separate them. When you put the high-functioning kids with the at-risk youth, and you make them a community working together, what comes out from each of those groups is a greater and a higher level of retention and of knowledge and of reflection.
What methods do you use to assess the effectiveness of campus and district leadership? And if the leadership is found to be ineffective, how do you handle it?
I think the first thing you use is data, as I've said. Data is crucial. Number one, have we taught our faculty, our administrators, our staff how to use the data, how to understand the data, how to function within the data, and how to bring what they're doing in the classroom and merging it together. So at Lake County, we had the ability to take the STAR test. We married that with NWEA, which is an assessment test we gave 4 times a year. And it was a computerized assessment test. And then we added that with the formative and summative tests and quizzes and projects that the teachers were doing. And then we took all of that information and we went out and got a grant from Dell, and a company called Data Director went ahead and created a program called Zoom, and we were able to take all of that data, put it into Zoom, and from a standardized perspective, have it fed out to us so that our teachers, our students, our parents, our administrators, everybody understood what the data meant and how we were going to interpret it and how we were using it and where we were falling short and where we needed to bolster. Now, the specific question you've asked was about administration. And I think that it's crucial that you add to your data surveys, student surveys, teacher surveys, parent surveys, community surveys. No administrator should feel that they're outside of being evaluated. And they should know what that evaluation is going to look like and what the community is looking for to them for. What, you know, if an administrator doesn't know what your anticipation and what your expectations are, how can they function? So the first is the board being really clear with your administrators on what is expected, what is desired, what the timelines are, what the benchmarks are, what the accountability is, and what the reflection is going to be on that. And then working together to give them professional development as well. And so whatever you're going to be doing with kids, you're going to do the teachers, you need to do the same thing with administrators. Everybody needs to be supported in one way or another. A good way to support administrators is get them to be mentored. Take your administrator and take him to a campus where you really like what's going on at that campus. You really believe what that administrator is doing. We all can improve, or we all need a sounding board. Sometimes we come up with issues and we need somebody to talk to. And as an administrator, you feel like you're out there in the wind, blowing in the wind, and with no support. Just like a teacher doesn't feel they can take a risk, the administration doesn't know what to do necessarily. So they need that support as well. You don't have to keep getting up and down unless you want to.
It just feels more polite that way.
Okay. Well, I'll sit down.
How do you measure your effectiveness as a leader?
The first way I measure my effectiveness as a leader is with the enthusiasm that's going on in the classroom and when I enter a building. Are my kids smiling? Are my teachers excited? Are my parents enthusiastic about what we're doing? Are kids coming up to me and challenging me with questions? Are my teachers willing to take risks? All the things that I've tried to elucidate these last few, it feels like hours now, doesn't it? Right?
Research subject. Oh, you're still here. Good. Excellent. So, how much homework is appropriate for ACA students in a given week?
Well, I turned that question around on you. And I said, how are you going to demonstrate that you're able to take what you learned in the classroom and demonstrate your ability to use it and remember it and retain it? So, you were going to answer my question first, and then I was going to come back to you with my response to how much homework there should be. Do you have an answer yet? I don't want to put you on the spot, but answer the question.
Well, I'll say, the point of homework is going to input the lesson in the class. The thing is, a lot of times, they'll spend weeks on the same lesson. Not the exact same lesson, but they'll spend a long time. So again and again and again. And the thing is, there's a bunch of homework. I don't think it just takes up more time if you have more homework and you're still going to do the same thing the next day.
Everybody hear what he said? Excellent. But you are limiting what it's about by saying that the whole idea is to imprint on you. My question is, how are you going to demonstrate that you can use that information? And can you give me another way that you can demonstrate for yourself and for me as a teacher or your teachers, how you can demonstrate to them that not only did you retain it, not only has it been imprinted, not only has it been beaten into you over and over and over again, as you've said, but how do you use it? And if you can show me how to do that, then we can then start having a dialogue about the amount of homework. Because now we'll have a different frame of reference of how to look at it. Does that make sense? You want to try again, or I'll shut up? Okay.
How would you utilize parent involvement / volunteering to help with the efficiency of ACA?
I think parent involvement is crucial, but I think we have to step back a step before we talk about parent involvement. Teachers need to be trained on how to use parents when they come into the classroom. I can't tell you how many times a parent has come to me and said, I had an hour to spend and they didn't give me anything to do. Or I could have taken that home and done it at home. And so we need to work with the faculty and say, what are the things you need? What would you like your parents to be doing to helping you, to assist you? Do you need them to grade papers for you? You need them to staple something for you? Does it have to be done at school? Well, now when you know what your needs are, now we can start supporting the parents and being in the classroom and making them feel that what they're doing for you is successful and worthwhile and it's benefiting you and the kids in the classroom. I don't want a parent to come to me and blow it off and say, this is a waste of my time. Because you didn't have the time or the energy or the focus to be able to help that parent when they came in. So there has to be a mechanism for teachers to learn how to work with parents before we worry about getting parents into the classroom. Now that's a catch-22, the chicken and the egg. The parents are coming into the classroom, so one of the things we need to do is help teachers as soon as possible learn how to work with them, how to help them, how to put a list on the wall and have the parents come in and say, oh, I can do this, or can I take this home? You want to staple 50 reports together? They don't need to do it in the classroom. Take it home. Send it back in with your kid. You want them to grade papers? Then you better be able to give them the answers so they know how to grade the papers. Don't expect them to figure it out. And so there's that catch-22, and it's a balancing act, and it has to be worked together. It's not one versus the other. You have to work together. Otherwise, parents will stop coming.
Okay, what are your opinions on extracurricular activities such as sports or band?
I would like to see music, art, sports incorporated into what we do in the classroom. I would like our teachers to be taught how to use art in the classroom. I'd like our art teacher not to just come into the classroom and teach art for 15 minutes, but teach my teachers how to use art. I'd like my music teacher to be able to walk into the classroom and work with the teachers and teach them how to use music as an intercultural way of kids communicating and crossing all boundaries. I'd like my music teacher to be able to show teachers how to use music to teach math. Because when kids play instruments, their math scores go up. I want our kids to be exercising. I want our kids to be enjoying sports. I don't want that there's going to be some kids who are going to go out and play intramurals after school because they can. I want all our kids to participate. So how do we do that? How do we incorporate that within what we're doing? And that's the key. How can we incorporate it? It shouldn't be either or. It should be, let's get it into the classroom. Let's use those people who have the skill sets to teach us how to do it appropriately and effectively so that we can do projects, that we can do experiential learning, that we can do all these other things. And it's not limited. Why can't a teacher teach our kids how to use the recorder? Maybe learn it themselves. There's nothing wrong with that. Think of all the other things, trickle down, so to speak, that our kids are going to benefit by doing art in the classroom, by doing music in the classroom. Not having somebody come in and the teacher leaving, okay, here's such and such, you're going to do art now, bye, I'll see you in 40 minutes. No. Maybe that teacher will stay with you and work with you in the classroom as a specialist to help you with your projects. So you need to sit down as a teacher, tell the specialist, this is what my curriculum is. This is what we're going to be doing next. How can you help me incorporate art and support the enthusiasm, the creativity of the kids in this subject so they can show me in different ways what they've learned? Not everybody's going to be successful on a test. Maybe they can draw. Maybe they can write a piece of music or a song. I had a kid who, he always had his head down on the table. It was a history class. Teacher did not know what to do with him. And I said, well, what does he like? I don't know. I said, ask him. please ask him, what does he like? His response was, I like to rap. So the teacher came back to me and said, he likes to rap. Okay. I went into the classroom with her. I said, you like to rap? What are we studying? The War of 1812. Rap the War of 1812 to me. Within 2 minutes, that kid was rapping the War of 1812. But I didn't understand it. He was going too fast. I said, slow it down. And I had to have him slow it down 3 or 4 times. Same rap. By the 3rd or 4th time, I knew unequivocally that that young boy knew everything about the War of 1812. I didn't have to give him a test. He proved it to me in what he did best. That's what it's about.
How would you handle a directive from the board which you strongly disagree with?
First of all, I would hope that the board is working with me, because if we are not working together and transparently, I don't want the board to come down with a dictate that came out of left field somewhere and say, you've got to do this, because then you're cutting my feet out from underneath me. Now, I also want to work with the board that if for some reason the board decides you do want me to do something, I want to be able to tell you and give you the data and give you the information and give you the research to show not why I think it may work or not work, but what other people have demonstrated, so that you can make that decision with all the knowledge available to you, not just because I said I didn't like it. Now, if after all that's in place and you still want to do it, then my job is going to be to convince my faculty and how to implement it with the faculty and how to support the faculty to realize that we need to do this. So there's a story I tell. When I first moved to California, I wanted to get a bank account, and they wouldn't let me get a bank account unless I had a driver's license in California. So I went to get the driver's license. And when you take the written test, at the end they mark it right in front of you. And I got this one question wrong. And I went, wait a minute. And the question was, how many cars need to be behind you? You're traveling slowly, you're traveling slowly on a curvy mountain road. How many cars need to be behind you before you pull over? 2, 3, 5, 7. I picked 3. I was wrong. The answer was 5. I turned to the lady and I said, wait a minute. You can't see 5 cars behind you on a curvy mountain road. And her response was, there's Sacramento and there's reality. So in some cases, ours is not to question why. We've got to just go ahead and do it because you've requested it. But you will hear from me. Because I will support my teachers and let you know what the effect is going to be on them in implementing something. Because if it's only me that doesn't like the idea, then I'm just going to do it because that's irrelevant. But if my teachers are going to be up in arms about it, for whatever reason, since you haven't given me something specific, I have to support them to the board as well.
Okay, and so there's another question that is in a similar vein as to where you just had. What crossed boundaries, if any, would cause you to end your employment relationship with ACA? And then they'll give you a softball on that.
Thibodeau, right? Am I right? And I were talking earlier. And I was talking to her about a board president I had in California. And the board president started in January. And the board president was a contractor. And we had 2 pieces of property. One was a rental, and on the other side of the street, as I said during the presentation, we bought a property that we raised money and we renovated. And on that property were 2 buildings. One was an office, it was a cottage that was used as an office, and the other was a garage for storage. And we wanted to expand the main building out so we could put more kids in it. The board president went ahead, after I told him not to do it, and went ahead and tore down the buildings without a permit. and had the school red tagged that we couldn't use the buildings at all and couldn't bring a child into the buildings because they didn't know if there was asbestos in the building when it was torn down. There was no permits to tear it down. There were no permits to get rid of the garbage and haul it off. And so they red tagged us. Don't do that to me.
Okay. So just softball. Okay. Why did you apply for this position?
I believe in the community. This community is considered one of the best communities to live in not only Texas, but in a lot of the country. And I believed in the work of ACA and in what you're doing and how you've been implementing it, and that's why I decided to apply. I just believed in what you were doing. And felt that I could enhance it and support it and grow with it.
Okay, we have, how would you address a teacher who wants to lower academic standards on the basis that too many students would be unable to perform at that high level?
That's real easy. Show me the data. Demonstrate the data that indicates that. And then I want to take the data that that teacher is going to show me, and I want to look at the data of the entire school and the entire district. And I want to see what other teachers are doing at other grade levels and in the same grade level and evaluate that data. So just because a teacher comes to me and says that they want to lower standards, explain it to me, show it to me, demonstrate it to me, and then be able to demonstrate it to me in relationship to everything else that we're doing and why other teachers are able to do it and you're not able to do it. There's not going to be a clear cut, oh, you want to lower standards, we're going to do it. It's not going to happen. What I need to do is teach the teacher how to understand the data and how to improve on their skill sets to be a more effective teacher. And that might mean having them mentor through somebody else, because something else is going on. There's something else underneath that that is potentially going on where the teacher may be going through a divorce, the teacher may have had somebody die in their family, the teacher may be exhausted or be sick themselves and just don't have the energy to do certain things. I'm going to want to research what's really going on and what's underneath some of those issues that that teacher may be bringing up to me. Because it may not just be as cut and dry as I need to cut the standards so my kids can't do it. It may be I don't have the energy right now and I need some additional support, and how do I get it? And then I need to figure out how to get that teacher that support.
Next question is, can you give an example from your past of a pressing community issue that affected the classroom? And what methods did you use to address that issue?
I'll give you two if I may. The first issue was that when I took over Lake County National Charter School, the community wanted to close the school. They hated it. It had been open 1 year. They were not pleased with what was going on. They called it the quote-unquote hippie school. The school district hated the school that they were sponsoring because it was forced on them. They had no choice but accept the charter, and they didn't like it. And so these two groups, the community and the school district, decided they wanted to get rid of the charter school. So when I came in, I had to ingratiate the school to the community. And the only way to do that was me from doing it. And so I found out that there was a breakfast place in town. Remember, this is upwards rural Northern California, and it was called the Cowpoke. And every morning, from 6 to 8, you had construction people, you had ranchers, you had farmers, you had the wives of the ranchers and the farmers, you had all these different groups of people who went to this Cowpoke and sat down and either had coffee or breakfast before they went on to their job. For 3 years, I went to that Cowpoke every morning, Monday through Friday, and sometimes on Saturday, unless I had to go to a meeting or had a program that I had to do somewhere else or I had to cover for a teacher. I was at that Cowpoke, and I was sitting at one of the tables. And within 3 years, and it took 3 years, I was finally allowed to sit at some of the other tables. They finally accepted me and allowed me to come in and sit at other tables and talk to them. And so they started to view the school through me. And I didn't look like a hippie, even if I might have been one. And because they started to view the school through me, their whole idea about the school shifted and changed. And they now started respecting the school. And because when they had a question, I was there, and if they didn't like something, or if somebody drove by and didn't like what they saw, they knew that they could come and ask me. It was like my open door policy. Then at the same time, I needed to make sure that we had a good relationship with the school district that was our sponsoring district. And so I got to meet the superintendent. I was a superintendent, he was a superintendent. I found out that twice a month they had a board meeting, and twice a month, on the very next morning at 10 a.m., he had an administrators meeting with all of his administrators, right after that board meeting. And I got him to invite me to that board meeting, to that meeting, after their board meeting the very next day, twice a month. And at the beginning, they didn't know why I was there. Eventually, they turned around to the point where the other administrators started to recommend kids to my school. To say, you know what, your son is having a difficult time here, or your daughter, why don't you try the charter school? That may be a better environment for your child. And that was a major turnaround. Now, going back more specifically to a teacher-parent issue, I had a parent who his wife, for lack of a better term, lost it. In front of the child and in front of him, and killed their dog, and I mean, she, for lack of a better term, went berserk. And they had a restraining order out on her, and she couldn't come into the house. I mean, she was a threat to the family. And the father was very, very possessive and protective of his two sons. One of them who happened to be in 7th grade. Now, the teacher, in the beginning of the school year, allowed kids to turn in work late. But he gave them a window. If it was due on this date, he would say, okay, it's due on this date. If you need some extra time, I'll give you some extra time, but you're going to lose some points. Okay? And as the school year progressed, that window of opportunity got smaller and smaller and smaller, to the point where at the end of the school year, it was an end-of-the-year project, and the teacher had told all of the students, it's going to be turned in. Here's where you're going to turn it in. He had a bin for the project to be turned in the front of the classroom. You cannot turn it in late. If you turn it in one day late, you get a 0. Well, this man's son had brought his project to school a week early. He had it. His desk was right next to the teacher's. And he had his project. But he never took the project and put it in the bin in the front of the classroom, where the teacher insisted that all the projects be put by that due date and not a day later. And he got a 0. And the father was furious and came in screaming and ranting and raving, demanding that I change the grade because he put in so much effort into doing his project. And I agreed. He sure as heck did put a lot of time in. But he didn't meet the standards of accountability that the teacher had set out. The teacher wrote it on the wall. The teacher had it on the blackboard for weeks in advance. And I walk in and out of classrooms all the time, so I knew what was being asked. But I still went to the teacher, and I talked to the teacher, and I said, what's going on here? And just as I've explained to you, he told me what happened. And I said, would you mind talking to the parent? And if you'd like, I'll be there with you. And he agreed. He went and talked to the parent. He wouldn't change the grade. The parent came out still furious. Came to me and still wanted the grade changed. And I ended up going to the policies and procedures of the state of California, and it said specifically that unless I find that the teacher had done something capriciously or inappropriately, I, as an administrator, did not have the authority to change the grade. So whether I would have changed it or not is not the issue. I didn't have the authority to do it. And I backed up my teacher, and I told the parent, I can't change the grade. And here it is in black and white. So sometimes you've got to go both ways and try to do everything you can to support what a parent is asking for, but it doesn't mean you can always agree.
few questions along the lines of revenue streams. California, Louisiana, Texas, doesn't matter what state you're in, budget cuts are coming, and on the state level, which have necessitated cuts at the school level. What types of fundraising ideas would you pursue to help restore some of that funding?
I think you need to have long and short-term fundraising and development campaigns. You need to have a capital campaign. But one thing I need to make clear in all of my fundraising experience, you cannot raise funds to pay off debt. Cannot be done. It's illegal. In most states. I don't know about Texas, but in all the other states I've been in, you can't raise money to pay off your debts. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't raise money for a project that frees up money in my budget that I could use to pay off the debt, because I've now freed it up. Sometimes it's smoke and mirrors, and you got to figure out how to pay Peter to Paul, as you're well aware. But you can't raise fundraising money and pay off debt. So you got to figure out another way to do it if that's what your intention is. You need long-term goals. You need capital campaign. You also must understand that if you're going to raise money, it takes money to raise money. You can talk about volunteers up and down the kazoo, and it doesn't mean a thing. If you want to raise money, it's going to take money to raise money. You're going to have materials. You're going to have collateral materials. You're going to have to go out into the community. It's going to cost money to raise money. And depending on how much, there's a formula for it, and depending on how much you want to raise, you'd better have some capital available so that you can go and do it. Then you need short-term funding. You need annual campaigns where you're going to ask the parents to raise money. So one of the things that I was mentioning earlier was we told our parents, all of you have coffee every morning. How about, it's a 180-day school year, how about give up one coffee a day and give that money to the school? And if it's Starbucks, as Greg said to me earlier, heck, we might make a lot of money. Then there's other programs. We had a Live and Give celebration, which was a silent auction, a live auction, a festival, and we did it once a year. And we had to figure out what time of year to put it in, because other schools were doing other types of events, so we didn't want, everybody's trying to raise money. So you got to be able to figure out where you can fit your events in. So we did this Live and Give celebration. It became an annual celebration. And we raised upwards of $15,000, $20,000 every year just in a Live and Give celebration, where parents came, they had good food, they had entertainment, they had a silent auction, they had a public auction, and I had the audacity to be the auctioneer. Don't giggle. So there's lots of different things you can do. You also need to look at annuities. How can you get money from people that you can potentially put into an annuity whereby, to be a little more specific, let's say that I know a couple of people who are fairly well off, and maybe I can get them to park with me $100,000 each. So maybe if I know 5 people that have the ability to park with me $100,000 each, I can put that into an annuity. And I can draw the interest off that. And what I do with that is that I take part of the money that is being drawn off as interest because of the annuity, I give that back to the person because the money still belongs to them. I want to pay them back. So if they gave me $100,000 over a period of time, I'm going to take part of the interest that's going to come back and I'm going to pay back the person who gave me the money. I'm going to take another third of that, I'm going to give it to the school to put it into the budget. I'm going to take the last third of that and I'm going to replace the money that I paid back out to the person who gave me the money, so that over 5 years or so, I have replaced the $500,000 with $500,000 of the school's money. Now that money belongs to the school 100%. And all the money that comes in belongs to the school, and we can determine how we want to use it. So there's lots of different ways and lots of different techniques that you can use for fundraising. Okay? Getting sponsorship. You've got a beautiful building here. You've got a beautiful wall there. What if we put bricks on that wall and people paid to have their name on that brick? What if we put the bricks on the floor? What if we put the sign? What if there was a banner and they're going to have their name in the newspaper, they're going to have their name on the website, they're going to have their name on the wall? You give people choices You know, you can pick from column A and column B, and this is what it means, and if you give me $10,000, or if you give me $1,000, this is what you're going to get for that money. And you're going to get visibility, because we're going to spread the word into the community. We're going to tell the community that you support the school. It's good PR for them, it's good PR for you, and they're going to pay for it. So there's lots of different fundraising things that we can do. Those are just some samples.
Based on your knowledge of ACA, what are the most pressing issues facing ACA, and how do you plan to address them?
Well, first of all, there's a learning curve. If I was to be honored to be in the position, there's going to be a learning curve that I would have to learn about what's really going on, what's really happening, what the tensions are, what the challenges are, where the skeletons are, so to speak. Not that there are any. There are none, I'm sure. And once I've learned that, then I've got to make a presentation to the board and talk to the board about what my ideas are. I'm just not going to go out and, you know, be a gunslinger, so to speak, and start doing things. We have to do this in concert with each other. So if I see things that, first of all, the board's going to give me a list of things that you already know that you need to be addressed. And so I need to have an experience of what those things are. I need to be able to understand what they are. I need to be able to see what the dynamics of those things are. And then I need to come in with a proposal that I can give to the board and to the parents and to the community to say, here's how I think we could address those. And then open up that for a discussion. Maybe you've tried some of those already. I don't know. Maybe you haven't. And then, okay, if we are going to implement any of these, how are we going to implement them? What the benchmark's going to be, and what the timeline's going to be, and what the accountability is going to be, and who is going to spearhead each of the different things we're talking about. It's great to have a strategic plan. It's great to say we're going to have action plans and all this. When, how, and who? Who's going to do it? Who's going to be responsible? Whoever's going to be responsible, it could be a board member, it could be a teacher, it could be a parent, is then going to have to report to me on an ongoing basis so that we can see what's going on, we can support each other, and then we can report to the board together, this is how it's working, and this is what the changes are that need to be done, and here's how we're going to implement them. So instead of talking about anything specific, there's so many different things that, you know, it's like professional development. Let's get your teachers from both campuses together and do professional development together. They should be meeting in the same room. They should get to know each other. It shouldn't be two separate campuses. It's one school. We may have elementary in two different places, but it's one school district. How can we work together? How can we support each other? Can I come over to see what you're doing? Can you come over to see what I'm doing? And so there's lots of different ways to do things. We just got to put those proposals into place and evaluate them.
Okay, and last question, and we're out of time. Is the education field a 9-to-5 type job, or should administrators and staff be involved with after hours and weekend events like field trips, carnivals, and galas?
I wish it was a 9-to-5 job. I don't think I've ever put in less than 70 or 80 hours a week in any of the jobs that I've ever had. You are either in it or you're not in it, and you're not going to get it. You're not going to get it done any other way. And it's not just about what you're doing, it's about what you're showing everybody else that you're doing. Because you're a model for everybody else. And if you're not going to be willing to be that model, and if you're not going to be out there, and if you're not going to be doing it, and you're not going to be supporting your teachers and your staff, it's not going to happen. You know, you can't put on a live and give event 9 to 5. The moment your event ends is the moment you start planning for your next event. So you got a year in advance, you better be planning for that event. And you'd better make sure that you're supporting the person who's going to spearhead that event. And so aside from, I mean, think of all the things you've asked me questions about. You know, what are the issues in the school? What about professional development? What about fundraising? What about revenue streams? You don't get that done in a 9-to-5 job. But you've got to be able to micromanage yourself. You've got to be able to be accountable. You've got to be able to multitask. You've got to be able to determine when you're going to put what effort into what and how much time, and what your accountability is going to be, and when you're going to be able to report out. And if you can't report out and you can't get it done, you need to let the people know who you are working with, not just the board, but everybody you're working with, that we need to change this timeline somehow, because we're not going to meet our deadlines. Or we need to cut back and say, let's change something so that we can work more efficiently together. Thank you.
Well, let's thank our candidates for a second.